All right, if we are live, and I believe we are, so welcome everybody to another special Christmas and New Year's edition of AFC's Sport Talk podcast. I'm Alex Chris, and I'm pleased to introduce to you one of the newest members of our AFC Sport Talk podcast panel, in my cousin Will Harris, a diehard Boston sports fan, as obviously we see the Mets and the Boston Red Sox hat on there tonight. But Will, though, obviously, as I mentioned to you when we met for my cousin Maddie's wedding on Thanksgiving, it's a pleasure to have you on the panel, and thanks for taking some time to talk sports tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat it up.
All right, so probably obviously, it's been a long time since obviously my last podcast at the 2024 NFL draft. So certainly we're probably just going to go ahead and just jump right into the state of the NFL playoff picture, which has certainly been buzzing right now. And obviously we'll go ahead and just start with the AFC right now. Of course, the Kansas City Chiefs at 15-1, strongly in the number one seed and clinched with their victory over Pittsburgh earlier this week. Buffalo Bills standing strong at 12-3. Baltimore and Pittsburgh battling it out for obviously the number 3 seed in the AFC playoff picture. Obviously, the Ravens defeated the Houston Texans to get to 11-5. Pittsburgh at 10-6. Then obviously the Houston Texans are at number 4 at a record of 9-7. But kind of what I wanted to kind of first touch base on you here, Will, obviously talking about our favorite teams with the New England Patriots as well as my New York Giants. I'll probably go ahead and just kind of start with the state of the AFC East. And probably my thing to you is that I remember seeing like what's going on with Drake May this year. And certainly after hearing from really Robert Kraft saying that he's going to put his trust in Gerard Mayo as their next head coach going into the future, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the state of the Patriots franchise.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that it's been an abysmal season so far. But, I think starting Jacoby for those first couple weeks was the right thing to do. Allowed Drake May to learn from Jacoby, who had played in the Alex Van Pelt offense in Cleveland. Gave him some time to learn, kind of see the game from the sidelines. And then when he stepped in, I think he's been playing really well. I'm really excited about the future with Drake May. The rest of the supporting cast we could do a whole change with them, but they have the most cap space heading into this offseason. If they decide to spend it and spend it wisely, I think we could be, a 500 team next year. But we've seen, I forget what year it was, but it's when we signed Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith and all those guys. They spent a lot of money that offseason, and it didn't really work out. So it depends who they spend it on. But I think, with a high draft pick, I would assume that they're going to trade back and try and get some more draft capital. Because I don't think there's a clear choice for the Patriots specifically at number 2 if it ends up that way. But I think there is, some bright spots as a Patriots fan moving forward, and Drake May is a huge part of that.
Agreed. Certainly I also was trying to tell this to my cousins a couple of years ago when we were kind of talking about the draft class of Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones. When I was telling him about how the Patriots should have developed Mac Jones, obviously it was a waste in that second year between the flip-flop between Joe Judge and Matt Patricia as the coordinators. But I remember telling him, I said, like, when I saw Mac Jones as a rookie, when he really stepped up, obviously it kind of reminded me more of Drew Bledsoe when he first started with the Patriots, when Parcells was their head coach. And then I think kind of like when I was delving back into history, when I was just kind of thinking, I know obviously their skill sets are different, but for me, I just almost kind of think like the Drake May counter type for me, even though obviously May's got great arm talent, is probably back to like when the Patriots were like in the mid 70s with Steve Grogan as their quarterback. Obviously he was a more rushing quarterback than a throwing quarterback. But if I remember correctly, when I was looking at Steve um, Grogan when he started with the Patriots, I believe his first year with them was in 1975. He had a 1-6 record as a starter, but then the following year after that, they totally turned it around with an 11-3 mark. So certainly, as you were saying, if the Patriots can certainly use the salary cap as well as trade back for draft picks, hopefully maybe they can have a similar turnaround with Drake May as they did with Steve Grogan back in the mid 70s.
Yep. And us New England fans, we're not very patient. We're definitely a little spoiled. At least I know I am. My whole life growing up was just Patriots. The season started at the AFC Championship game. So having 3 and 4 win seasons isn't what we're used to. And hopefully we can turn that around sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and move on, just touch base on some of the other teams in the AFC East right now. Obviously, the Jets, just a disaster of a season with Aaron Rodgers and really a total flip-flop with Robert Saleh gone, and as well as the firing of Joe Douglas. And then the Miami Dolphins, kind of Mike McDaniel, it's kind of been the Tua Tagovailoa injury history that's kind of really held the Dolphins back. And then probably no shade on my cousins who are big Buffalo Bills fans who I'll be seeing tomorrow night. But obviously, Josh Allen has had an incredible season for the Buffalo Bills. Certainly when I remember telling them, it's like he kind of reminded me early in his career when he started with the Buffalo Bills back like in his rookie year. I remember telling someone to my family, it was kind of like almost like an early version of like Daryl LaMonica when he always just kind of would heave, balls in like into the stratosphere. It's like, the accuracy wasn't there for LaMonica, but certainly this year, Allen has kind of shades of that 2021 season when he and Mahomes went at it. And certainly that's what the Buffalo Bills are vying for. And, basically just kind of I'll hand it off to you on just kind of what you think about the rest of the AFC East.
Yeah, the Jets, I think, were the biggest surprise. With the amount of players that they signed, the emergence of Breece Hall, the defense was, a top defense heading into the year. Mm-hmm. And Aaron Rodgers coming back. I mean, one of the greatest, quarterbacks in the NFL history. And I know he was 40, 41 and coming off an Achilles, but you still kind of had that expectation that they were going to perform way better than what they had this year. So they were the biggest surprise for me in the AFC East. And then with the Dolphins, it really just runs through the Tua injuries, in my opinion. Achane is playing out of his mind. Mm-hmm. Mostert hasn't really gotten the touches that he did last year, but neither has Jalen Waddle. So right. It's just interesting, and it's tough when Tua goes down like that and coming back and just trying to pick up where you left off. I think the Dolphins need to seriously consider getting a legit, backup quarterback, because I don't know how long this can be sustainable. Right. And then the Bills, I think the Bills are they're the best chance at beating the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably sticking with the Chiefs until it happens. But right. I love the way that Josh Allen's playing. I love how, Stephon Diggs leaves in the offseason. Right. Guys like Mac Hollins step up, and they're playing really well. Khalil Shakir, I had him in fantasy. He was the consistent, 15 points a game, and he's been playing really well. But I love what the Bills are doing. Josh Allen's one of my favorite players in the league. And I will be rooting for them to take down the Chiefs. But
yeah, certainly I was hyping on the Khalil Shakir train as you were just saying. I remember watching highlights of him at Boise State, and I remember telling, my cousins, I said, obviously that was they had Stephon Diggs last year, but, like we were just mentioning, I mean, Josh Allen's done a really good job just not really force feeding so much. Obviously, like you were saying about Mac Hollins and Shakir, and obviously is Amari Cooper, and also the 2 tight end set and Dalton Kincaid and and Knox. That's probably been the one thing that's really impressed with me about Josh Allen this year is that he hasn't really force-fed anyone, too many targets. He's able to keep all of his playmakers, relatively healthy, as well as his running back James Cook that he has.
Yeah, he's been playing great.
So, yeah. So we're going to go ahead and switch to one of the next divisions that's probably been one of the most competitive divisions in terms of just the three teams in it, with the AFC North. Obviously, as I mentioned, Baltimore and Pittsburgh battling it out, and Cincinnati Bengals not too far as well, competing for one of the final playoff spots there. And then obviously with the Cleveland Browns, just, again, just an incredible, just downturn for the Browns after really the hype last year of Joe Flacco and everything else. And, basically we've seen the waste of the Deshaun Watson contract in Cleveland. But really, when you kind of look at those other three teams, Pittsburgh, obviously a big decision with their two quarterback system and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and obviously Lamar, hopefully maybe he can get over the hump in the playoffs, but, he's kind of hasn't pulled it out in the playoffs. But Joe Burrow for the Bengals is just, an incredible revelation. But I just think it's so unfair that Cincinnati, though, I think they have really treated Burrow unfairly, as I've seen over the last 20 years. They kind of did it to Carson Palmer. They did it to Andy Dalton. And now it seems they're doing it to Joe Burrow, knowing that Higgins is probably going to be on the free agency or the trade block, or they just really haven't built the team around them per se to get Cincinnati over the hump. And I'll leave it to you for the sake of the AFC North.
Yeah, the Browns are a dumpster fire. I think everyone understands that. I did see that Deshaun Watson was restructuring his contract. I think that news came out today. And then Nick Chubb, it's tough seeing him getting hurt so often and the severity of the injuries, because he's a hell of a running back. But the Bengals, they've been starting to get hot here, and they're putting up a ton of points. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they're all showing what they can do. Really would be interested to see if they can sneak into a playoff spot, because they could be pretty dangerous in my opinion. But I agree with what you're saying about how they're treating Joe Burrow. It's just another example of, a list of Bengals quarterbacks and supporting them and paying the players. And it's part of the business, but sometimes you gotta step up to the plate. And who knows, maybe T. Higgins will be a Patriot next year, but that's besides the and then the Steelers, I was really interested to see how they were going to handle the Russell Wilson situation going into the year. And then he started the year with that injury, and Justin Fields stepped in and I thought played really well. And then when they switched back to Russell Wilson, I wasn't totally sure if that was the right move, given what he did in Denver. But he's had a nice little resurgence here, and if they can stay healthy, I don't think the Bengals will have any shot at sneaking in. And then the Ravens, Lamar Jackson's been playing out of his mind. The addition of Derrick Henry, it's just a dangerous combination with those two runners. Love what Justice Hill has done this year. And it's just a matter of them getting over the hump once they make it to the playoffs, because they've had the little bug of just not being able to get over that hump. So I like the Ravens the most. I mean, that's easy to say as they're at the top, but I think they just have such a dynamic offense. Mark Andrews started the year off slow, but is starting to pick it up, getting more touches. I think they could be dangerous if they get it together at the right time of the year, which is yet to be seen.
Of course, it's going to be interesting to see when the playoffs do begin. Certainly the one thing that I think is just so great about, obviously the four teams, obviously I've kind of said like the days of feature backs are over. I mean, obviously we kind of see the backs like Derrick Henry and maybe even you could say Chase Brown and maybe Najee Harris as well as Nick Chubb. But just like seems like all four of those teams have really good feature backs they can build around. And really the three of them have, done it almost to near perfection. What you were just saying about Chubb's injury. But, I think that's just so key now when we're seeing, just like how effective the running game is across the NFL. It's like I just kind of say, I know this is kind of the era of reintroducing the two-back system, but, if you can get a feature back to touch the ball 20, 25 times a game, I mean, that's such a difference in the NFL now.
Yeah, I think both teams have, the good mix of having that feature back and then having guys like Justice Hill. I think Chase Brown and Zach Moss were kind of splitting time earlier in the year, and then Zach Moss got hurt. Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford has had some decent games throughout the year. And then Najee and Jalen Warren. So they all have similar kinds of backfields, in my opinion. And I think that's just kind of how the AFC North in particular has always kind of been. But yeah, I love the running back play out of the AFC North.
I do too. We'll go ahead and move on though to probably one of the next divisions here. We'll probably actually just go ahead and skip the AFC South for right now. Jacksonville and Tennessee, at 3 and 12. Certainly I'll have my hands full with my cousin Sam. He and I were pretty much, you could say, right about the whole Trevor Lawrence thing coming out of college. Certainly we'll have a handful to talk about that tomorrow night. But let's talk a little bit about the state of the AFC West right now. Obviously, as I mentioned right at the start, I mean, Kansas City, they've either been lucky or whatever it is, but just, 15-1, and still plugging along is just incredible of what Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes has done, even though Mahomes' interception and his turnovers sometimes, when I've seen him this year, even though he's kind of corrected it a little bit recently, that's the one thing I think that is a little troublesome for Kansas City. I think Steve Spagnuolo's done a great job with that defense over the last few years, though. But talking about the two surprising teams, though, obviously the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers. Bo Nix has had, obviously, probably not an offensive rookie of the year for them. Obviously, people are thinking it's going to be Jaden Daniels who will win it for the Washington Commanders. But, certainly seeing Bo Nix turning around, and obviously Justin Herbert really doing well as well with very few turnovers, and really kind of Harbaugh almost kind of treating him almost probably as he should have been in his rookie year when he had Brandon Staley. But really talking about those two teams and the Broncos and the Chargers, probably heading into next year, Will, which of those teams do you think might have the better chance at running down the Kansas City Chiefs, you think?
Yeah, it's tough because they are so close, in my opinion. If I had to give someone the edge, I think it would be the Chargers, just because Justin Herbert is more established in the league. But I do love, the coach and quarterback pairings of the two. Sean Payton, in his first draft, chooses his guy, and I think that gave Bo Nix all the confidence in the world. And Sean Payton's great with coaching up his quarterbacks, and I just think the confidence that he was able to build, and having solid receivers are. Actually, I'm thinking specifically of Cortland Sutton. I think he's one of the more underrated wide receivers in the league. So they were definitely a surprise this year. I didn't see them being, a few games over 500, but their defense is very solid with Pat Surtain running the show on that side of the ball. And then Jim Harbaugh coming in, and the way that he was talking about Justin Herbert in training camp and everything, I just had a feeling that it was going to be, I did believe that they were going to be a couple games over 500 because they've been flirting around that 500 mark for the last couple of years now, it feels like. So getting some protection with Joe Alt, I think, is huge. Saves Herbert from some injuries. But, yeah, to answer your question, I think the Chargers have the slight edge in that division, in the second place spot.
I agree. I really loved what I saw from Bo Nix. Obviously, I mean, I saw him at Oregon, and I knew kind of really going into it. And someone was kind of saying this, in the media as well. It's like how they kind of say for quarterbacks who are underdeveloped. And obviously, with the NFL draft this year, it's kind of like what I've almost been saying. I know like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are really the big talk right now, but really I just kind of think if you want to basically go the route that Sean Payton did with Bo Nix, basically drafting a guy who's had like 40 or 50 college starts. I mean, he has the experience, but, it's kind of a tall task, really to say probably for this year's NFL draft. I mean, probably a quarterback like that might be drafted in the second or third round this year. But, for some of those teams that are floundering right now with 10 losses or more or with quarterback situations, it's going to be interesting to see, how teams use the NFL draft this year with no real clear, you could say, legitimate superstar quarterback. It just kind of seems like there's question marks for almost everybody coming out.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And the Raiders beating the Jaguars last week, slipping from the number 1 spot to the number 6 spot, I believe.
Or number 6. Okay.
But yeah, teams like that, I think they are going to be fighting I think that could be a good trade partner for the Patriots at number 2 if it stays that way. But yeah, it is interesting. I do agree the quarterback class isn't as strong, especially compared to last year. But we'll see what happens. It's always easy to say things before the draft, but once they strap it up, you get the full glimpse of it. So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Definitely we'll probably go ahead and we'll move on actually to the NFC side. Obviously, I know we kind of skipped over the AFC South, but we'll touch on
totally fine.
It just kind of seems the AFC South really floundering itself. Obviously, Indianapolis and Houston. I mean, CJ Stroud, I think obviously they've said the sophomore slump about him, but I think he's going to definitely turn it around. They just need to build that offensive line and hopefully he'll be okay. But we'll switch quick, though, to the NFC bracket right now and really just kind of talking about the state of the NFC right now. We'll go ahead and just start with my Giants in the NFC. Just get it over with. It's been a rough year for Giants fans. Obviously, I know it's going to be interesting with us using the number 1 overall pick. And, kind of like what you were saying about the Patriots, I think my dad and I are feeling the same about the Giants. I mean, if they don't feel that Ward or Shedeur is going to be their guy, I mean, basically just, use the number 1 pick and just, see if you can get a plethora of picks underneath. I do like some of their pieces, though. I think Tyrone Tracy's had a good year for us. Obviously, Neighbors, has had a really good year, but, he's kind of been a little banged up recently. And I think there is some good aspects of our defense, but it's been a hard sense of just really putting it all together for the Giants. Not so much, though, I would say, for Clay's Washington Commanders. I remember he and I were playing golf before the season began. I remember telling him, I said, like, what are your thoughts about Jaden? Or like, what are your thoughts about the season? He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm not really a fan, but I'm like saying to him now, I'm like, Clay, they're going to probably get 12 wins this year. It's like the last time the Washington football team or whatever they're called now, the Commanders, excuse me, but just like the last time I think they had more than 10 wins in a season was when they last won the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 26. I think they went 14-2 that year, but they're going to be 12-5 if they can run the table of their last 2 games after that strong win against Philadelphia last weekend.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the Giants. Clearly, it's never good when there's planes flying with banners telling to sell the team. But I do like their pieces on the defensive line, especially Burns, Lawrence, and Thibodeau. I think that's a pretty good wrecking crew up front. I also like Wan'Dale Robinson. I think he's been doing some good things this year, putting up some decent numbers, and they could have been better. But if he got rid of those drops, I feel like he drops 3 passes a game every time I watch the Giants. But Tyrone Tracy, I really like him. He's been a bright star, and I think it was smart of them to start giving him more touches instead of Singletary. So, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the number 1 pick. And I think trading back, you got to pick and choose what spot you eventually want to land at and pick at in that trade. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But yeah, talking about Clay, he about halfway through the year, he would start sending me texts, kind of jabs that, oh, do you wish you had Jaden Daniels, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yes, I do. But Drake May has been great for me so far. But the Commanders have been great. I really loved the Austin Eckler signing at the beginning of the year. I thought that added a brand new dimension and kind of freed up some space for Brian Robinson to do his thing. And then Terry McLaurin, he's one of my favorite wide receivers in the league. He's really fun to watch, and I think he's, a great locker room guy, and he's been there for a while. So having him and just being able to kind of rally the troops and keep this kind of train moving, they're going to be a fun team to watch, and I would love to see them make it into the playoffs because they deserve it. They
do.
Yeah, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. But just about Washington, though, certainly, as Clay and I were talking about. I mean, just really just overturning that whole franchise. I told him I did have my doubts about Dan Quinn, and I think I still do. Obviously, Dan Quinn was the head coach of Atlanta when they blew the 28-3 lead against the Patriots in Super Bowl 51. But I'm really impressed with how Washington's really been able to turn it around in 1 year, obviously hoping my Giants can hopefully turn around at the same time. But, Dallas Cowboys, though, and the Philadelphia Eagles, kind of talking about two teams that, people at the start of the year figured, they'd compete for the division. Obviously, Dallas, I mean, they're going to have severe cap issues with basically paying Prescott that money and CeeDee Lamb as well, almost eating 50% of the team's overall salary going into next year. And really, Philadelphia, I know my dad and I, we hate Saquon, knowing how great Saquon is. And obviously, I think he's going to go over 2,000 yards this year. I mean, me personally, obviously, just because of the person he is, I admire what Barkley is doing in that regard, even though I kind of consider him a traitor because obviously, he's in Philadelphia. But really right now, I mean, the Eagles, though, sitting at 12-3 after that loss, and, kind of the state of the NFC North too, with Detroit and Minnesota, really those three teams, vying for the number one seed right now. Obviously, Detroit has the edge right now, but, certainly seeing how those three teams, are probably the best bet for anybody making probably the NFC Championship picks. It's going to be interesting to see, who's going to make it there, and, it's going to be a great game, no matter, I think, who gets there, because you're talking about three pretty well-rounded teams, probably offensively, and maybe not so for the Lions defensively, but Philadelphia and Minnesota, their defenses are pretty well balanced.
Yeah, I think it's that. I would throw the Packers in there too. I think they're getting hot at the right time. But that Final Four in the NFC is going to be a blast to watch. You got to keep an eye on Jalen Hurts in Philly with his injury status, and obviously the storyline with the Lions all year has been how banged up they've been. But I can't get enough of Sam Darnold and how well he's been playing. Super happy for him. And I just think the path that he took, taking the time in Carolina didn't work out. Nothing really works out in Carolina, but and taking advantage of the opportunity he had in San Francisco. I just think he's performed well, and obviously having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, that doesn't hurt either. But it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be a battle. If I was a betting man, I don't know who I'd be taking.
I wouldn't either. I mean, it's certainly a toss up for me right now. I mean, for me, probably if I would have to say, probably right now, maybe I could see a matchup of kind of like what it was in 2017, even though I know the Eagles absolutely killed the Vikings in that game. I think that was when they had Case Keenum, I think, as their quarterback, was when Minnesota had him. I mean, that would probably be my bet right now, even though I'd love to see Detroit back in the NFC Championship myself. But I'm just a little concerned about how banged up their defense is. And, certainly Green Bay as well can make a wild card run too. But, Jordan Love, sometimes I'm a little doubtful on, some of his turnovers are a little concerning for me. But, probably before I just switch it back to you, when you were just bringing up about Sam Darnold, I remember telling this to someone the other day. I think his journey is, basically, I think probably one of the greatest turnarounds that I've seen probably in the last 10 years, because like when he came out of USC, when he went to the Jets with Adam Gase, and then when Carolina signed him, because I was still with the Panthers, working with the Panthers
Mhm.
at the time, I remember telling someone, I said, how much, did Gase really do? I mean, are you basically, buying broken goods or damaged goods? And I read right through it. I mean, I know he started 3-0 in Carolina, but then it just immediately went south there. But, Sam Darnold, I think, just, it's going to be a unique offseason for him this year if Minnesota decides to go with JJ McCarthy next year, or maybe someone will pluck him on the free agent tree. I'm probably maybe thinking maybe the Raiders might be in the bid, maybe Tennessee, or maybe even some NFC teams might be buyers. But I think the question I had is kind of like what I had with Adam Gase, is like, how much did O'Connell really unlock on Darnold, or is this really the legitimate quarterback that we've been waiting to see ever since he left USC in 2017?
Yeah, I think O'Connell, he came from the McVay tree, if I'm not mistaken. But just having a offensive mind guy who played quarterback in the league, has had success as a coach early on. I think that was huge for Sam and the offensive talent that they have, and brought in with Aaron Jones. It definitely helps. I hope Sam stays in Minnesota, and I hope they stick with him instead of JJ McCarthy. I just think Darnold needs a little, consistency, and keep his feet, I don't know what the saying was, but stay where he is. But I agree. It's one of the best, comeback and turnaround stories that I've seen in the NFL in quite a long time. So very happy for him.
I am too. Certainly we'll be discussing that, tomorrow as well. But we'll go ahead and preview the last two divisions here quickly, and then we'll maybe just see if we can just talk maybe a little bit outside the NFL briefly before we wrap this up. But just kind of the state of the NFC South right now. Obviously, the Saints and the Panthers. Bryce Young has turned it around nicely over those last few games. I'm still, kind of the questions I had about him though at Alabama. I just kind of remember saying to someone, with how Saban kind of finished poorly at Alabama, I just kind of said, Bryce Young really, I think, really did like all he could at Alabama with how less talent he had. And then really Carolina just kind of gave him a lot of broken goods, like the remains of Adam Thielen, and just really kind of like an old veteran team, even though obviously I know Young has kind of turned it around. But I mean, Carolina, I think they got to get younger, all around. Essentially, Saints are going to be a huge team, bit by the salary cap as well. I mean, Derek Carr obviously going to be big on the books. They keep re-signing Michael Thomas, and it's kind of just an old defense there. It's going to be a new identity though with the Saints though getting a new head coach after they canned Dennis Allen, and then you just kind of have Atlanta and Tampa Bay floundering around. I mean, I called this division like several years ago. I mean, when Brady joined the division, I basically remember saying to someone, when Brady leaves, someone needs to be able to take control of this division, or at least be the train wrecker. And really, ever since Brady's left in 2022, it's really been a mess of a division. And I just don't really see, like, outside of probably Atlanta or Tampa Bay for the next few years, unless somehow Carolina turns it around. I mean, I called this basically 3 years ago when, I said the state of this division. I mean, no one's really, put the cherry on top or saying like we're the control of this division. It's been kind of a dumpster fire of a division ever since Brady's left. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good call on your part. But I think the Saints have the longest road ahead of them, especially, Derek Carr. He can't win you games and meaningful games. Kamara's been great, but he's getting a little older now, and you don't know how much production he can sustain and sustain any injuries with him getting hurt in these last couple of weeks here. But Bryce Young is another guy that you love to root for. It really is about getting younger, and I love the emergence of Chuba Hubbard this year.
Me too.
He's been great, really fun to watch. And with the Bucs, I think the clear top quarterback in that division is Baker Mayfield. I love the connection with Mike Evans.
Mm-hmm.
The Jalen McMillan has been starting to get some touches as of late. He's been looking good. And Baker is, whether you like him or not, his journey in the last couple of years has been pretty remarkable as well. And his kind of him revitalizing his career.
Mm-hmm.
And the Falcons, that Kirk Cousins signing, hindsight's 2020, but Kirk Cousins signing clearly didn't work out. And once you drafted Michael Penix at 8 or 9, whatever it was, 8. It doesn't put Kirk Cousins, it doesn't ease his mind at all.
No.
And they were playing really well early on, and Ray McLeod was, overproducing from what he's done in the past, and Drake London looked really good. But I think it all depends with the Falcons moving forward. Is Michael Penix a guy, and that's to be determined. But Bijan Robinson in the backfield, Kyle Pitts, still hasn't lived up to what his hype was, but I think he's had a better year this year. So we'll see. We'll see with them. I think it's going to be. I think the Buccaneers are kind of the clear favorite moving forward. But I think the Panthers could jump the Saints, and then the Falcons are kind of the big question mark. But I would still kind of slot them in that second slot moving forward.
I agree. I'm certainly definitely hoping out for Michael Penix. I loved him at the University of Washington. I mean, I thought what he did, and obviously talking about your Patriots as well. I mean, I know obviously you were talking about McMillan. I was a little surprised that May hasn't really fed that Jalen Polk that they drafted. I had my high hopes on him when they drafted him from Washington. Hopefully, he'll have a bounce back sophomore year next year. But certainly the state of the NFC North is going to be an interesting one to watch this offseason, and certainly going into the future, if it will hopefully stay a 2-team race, or hopefully someone will come out on top. And then last but not least, we'll briefly discuss the NFC West here. Certainly the Rams with Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford finally getting healthy, and really a strong year as well from Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua this year for the Rams has really kind of been turning them around. San Francisco really been bit by the injury bug this year after appearing in last year's Super Bowl. They'll have a big decision with Brock Purdy this offseason. Arizona's been a really interesting surprise. I mean, when Arizona was in first place in this division, I just kind of remember saying, maybe Kyler's got it this year, but then just like in this slide, I'm just kind of saying, kind of like you were saying about the Cousins contract when they gave Murray the big bucks a couple of years ago. When they did that, I have my doubts on that. And then obviously Seattle, I kind of like what Mike McDonald has done with Seattle. Obviously I think, they're a little bit maybe underachieving or overachieving, however you put it, with Geno Smith. But I think that's going to be a big decision for Seattle, because I think they got really 2 great running backs in Kenneth Walker and the running back from UCLA that they drafted. But, certainly seeing about this NFC West, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking, if San Francisco and, Arizona can maybe get this turned around, maybe next year we could probably see all 4 teams battling it out. But certainly, some question marks about each of these teams' quarterbacks' futures: Stafford, Murray, Smith, and then also Purdy. I mean, that's 4 teams with really kind of 4 big decisions at quarterback this offseason. Well,
totally. And in my opinion, I think it's got to be I think the 49ers will bounce back. It's tough going through the injuries that they had to fight through this year. And Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, I think we can assume that he's a legit NFL quarterback.
Yes.
The Rams they have one of the most fun offenses in my opinion, with Stafford just slinging the rock around to Nakua and Cooper Kupp, and then Kyron Williams scores like what seems like 3 touchdowns a game. But the Cardinals, for me, I don't really have a lot of faith in the Cardinals at all. I remember when they started out the year, it was like 12-0 or something a few years back, and lost 6 straight. I love James Conner. He's one of my favorite running backs in the league. But I think one of my bigger, disappointments so far this year, and he's a rookie, but Marvin Harrison Jr., he being the first player non-quarterback drafted last year, and with the hype surrounded around him, I was expecting a lot more. And then you have guys like Brian Thomas in Jacksonville, who's really just leaving them in the dust in the receiving category. But I don't know if that's a connection issue with Kyler or what, or teams are just focusing on him because the Cardinals don't really have many other options other than Trey McBride. But the Cardinals, I just think they're going to be sticking around that, one game below 500 to one game above 500 record. I don't see them, changing that in the next couple of years here. But I think the Rams and the Seahawks, it'll be interesting to see what they do or how long, Stafford and Geno stick around. And I think their success kind of runs through that.
Definitely. So I think that's going to wrap it up for our NFL conversation here. Maybe just quickly, probably just like in no particular order, but just, probably maybe just kind of talking about maybe like the states of the other leagues for a bit, or, probably some of our other favorite teams. We kind of, obviously my Mets, I can talk about probably the Juan Soto signing, as long as possible. But, certainly I just kind of think with the state of what the Mets did, I think what is smart, what I read about the contract is I think the Mets can essentially, after 5 years, they could just let him go. So, almost like it just seems like the 5 years they would have him, and then they would certainly just maybe just see if someone else would be open up for a bid, if they wanted to get him. But, I'm glad that they actually kind of maybe got that and said, like, the Dodgers or the Yankees would have gotten him. I wouldn't have minded if he had stayed with the Yankees, but I think if the Dodgers got him, it would have just been a super team in the Dodgers with Ohtani and everybody else. And I just think, everybody would have cried foul if that had happened. But I also like that they re-signed Sean Manaea as well. I saw that they gave him a 3-year deal, and I love the year that they had last year too. I know it was a hiccup at the start, but just last year, just a magical run. And, obviously they lost to the Dodgers in 6 games, but, certainly the Mets, I think, have a really bright future. And, certainly I just kind of hoping maybe they can get their bullpen fixed. What about your Red Sox?
Yeah, well, first of all, congrats on Juan Soto. And also thank you for taking him out of the AL East. Glad I don't have to deal with him for the next 15 years. But the Red Sox, I've been keeping tabs on their offseason, way too much. But they finished 81-81 last year. I think overperformed, even though they finished at 500. Had 3 30-game starters in Tanner Houck, Cutter Crawford, and Brian Bayo. And then they made the big trade, which I think arguably has the most potential in Garrett Crochet. You have him under control for 2 years. He's 25 years old. Would love to see them just get an extension done right away, just to have that clear number one starter that we haven't had in so long, for an extended period of time. And then they've signed guys like Aroldis Chapman, not a great guy, but he throws hard.
Right.
Um, and they've had some other. The Walker Bueller signing, I think, could be a dark horse for the signing of the
Yeah.
offseason.
Hmm.
And then you got guys like Lucas Giolito, who we signed last year, who didn't pitch an inning last year because of a elbow injury in spring training, but he's coming back, and he's had years in the past where he's a legit starter. So I'm feeling really good about the rotation in the bullpen. It's the offense and the question marks at second base in particular. Are we going to sign like an Alex Bregman or something? Or we have a very rich farm system with position players who can cover the infield. I personally would like to get some of these minor league guys that we've been talking about for the last 3 years or so up and see what they can actually do at the big league level. But I haven't felt this excited / relatively optimistic about the Red Sox in the last, I want to say, 3 years. So
Sure.
I'm feeling pretty good.
Certainly, obviously I'm not trying to bring up bad things for anybody, but, obviously, I mean, like when, I watched like the Rich Eisen show with Chris Brockman, obviously I know he's a huge Boston fan, but obviously when they traded Bogarts and Betts, I just remember saying like when they won the World Series that they did, and then basically just kind of destroyed that team basically, to, basically relegate themselves to the cellar. But, certainly as you were saying about the AL East, I was surprised how Baltimore looked in the
Yeah.
postseason last year. I mean, basically, really, when they blew that series, I think against Detroit, and obviously, I know the Yankees, really fundamentally, they just don't, do well. It just always seems like I always say it's just the um, new version of what it used to be called in the 30s. I don't know why I'm blanking, but it's just like they would just have the home run hitters of Gehrig and Ruth, and that's really just like basically what they have now, and Stanton, and what was Soto last year. But it's just like it's a team that just you just wonder if they kind of just lack like the fundamentals to really play the game that it's supposed to be. And then really kind of Toronto, the Blue Jays, obviously Vlad Guerrero Jr., I think, he's kind of been a bit of a disappointment. Obviously, I know the Blue Jays haven't made the postseason much. And then obviously the Rays, you just kind of never know about Tampa Bay. But it's going to be interesting to see. When I was talking about this with someone after Hurricane Helene, when obviously now they'll be playing in the Tampa Yankees minor league ballpark, I was telling them I think the Toronto Blue Jays during the COVID year played in the Buffalo
Right.
Bison's AAA stadium. So that's going to be interesting to see with the AL East this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. The AL East, it'll definitely be interesting to see what Toronto does. I feel like they've just been begging someone to take all the money that they've been throwing at them. And I don't know whether it's just because they're in Canada, and I couldn't tell you, but they've been itching to get, a big free agent name. And now next year they'll have to decide what to do with Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero. So they'll be an interesting team to watch this year and throughout next year's offseason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll probably just go ahead and probably just talk a little bit more here. But obviously, I know we were discussing this as well. Your Boston Celtics, 22-8, and my next right behind him at 20-10. Certainly, I love the Karl Anthony Towns signing when they were able to nab him from Minnesota. But next, I remember telling you about that little present. I don't want to spoil my dad on the podcast if he's watching, but just like I told you about that just before we started. But I remember telling this to one of my good friends. I have another good friend of mine who's on this panel. He's also a Celtics fan himself, and I just remember telling him, I would just love to see like the Knicks and the Celtics like it just used to be, like when both teams were dominant in the 60s and 70s, going at it against each other. It just kind of seems like maybe if the Knicks can get there, it's going to be fun. But Boston, I think, just has a great all-around team. I know obviously the Cavaliers have been the insane surprise story of how great that they started, but maybe one of our two teams can catch them down.
Yeah, I think one of us will, or both of us. I think they're the way that the way that the Knicks are playing right now, not so much the Celtics. The Celtics are on a little skid right now, but the way the Knicks are playing right now, I'm very impressed. I love the way that, Mikal Bridges was getting a lot of heat early on because of his funky jump shot, but he seems to be locking in, had a huge Christmas day
Yeah.
2 days ago.
Mhm.
But Karl Anthony Towns leading the league in rebounds, just kind of flexing a little bit and, hyping up the crowd.
Mhm.
Didn't really see that too much in Minnesota. So I think there's just a brand new energy around the Knicks. And I think as long as they can stay healthy, maybe add a little more depth, maybe around like the trade deadline, I think they could be poised for a run for sure. And then the Celtics, they just need to stay healthy because we know, when they're healthy, what they can do. And I think that's just a matter of, Porzingis staying healthy. Drew Holiday's been fighting a little injury as of late, but I don't know how long we can rely on 38-year-old Al Horford to be playing, 35 minutes a night, but it'll be interesting.
It will be. We'll probably go ahead. Actually, probably wrap this up. I know I was kind of telling you we'll probably hit about the hour mark, so we got about 8 or 9 minutes. But I was just kind of seeing probably just the state of the rest of the sports leagues. I probably just maybe just wanted to hand it to you. If you had any questions, if you wanted to ask me anything before we just probably wrap this up for the night.
Yeah. Yeah. Who do you, going back to the NFL, do you think there's any chance that the Chiefs don't make it to the Super Bowl? Do you think this is the year that they could be dethroned?
Yeah, I think both you and I are in agreement, and I think my cousins as well. Tomorrow night will probably be hyping the Buffalo Bills to do it. I think what's probably going to hold the Chiefs back, like I mentioned earlier, Mahomes early in the year, his turnovers I think really concern me a bit, and I think that's probably the one caveat that you can kind of go against them. I know obviously they have Pacheco and they have a good receiving core, of what they've been able to do with Kelsey and obviously with some of the newer additions that they have in Xavier Worthy and on the others. But I just think if you're able to catch Mahomes on a bad day, if you can kind of get into a scoring thing, because obviously they haven't been able to eclipse a 30-point mark. I think the Bills are capable of doing that. I think the Ravens might be capable of doing that, but it's just about Lamar getting over the bug. I think those are probably the two best legitimate teams that I think have the chance, because I don't think Pittsburgh has enough offense. I think Houston, like I said, I think they need to revamp the offensive line. They'll maybe be able to compete, I think, maybe next year or maybe 2 years, with the Chiefs. But, I think as of right now, the Bills and Ravens, I think, are the best bet to knock Kansas City out in the AFC playoffs this year.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you there. This is kind of just like a personal question, but I'm interested in this too. What's like your favorite, sports memory? Could be as like a kid or, growing up. Like, was there something that kind of got you into sports right away that you watched? And
I'd probably say my childhood hero when I grew up was probably Mike Piazza when he was there
Mhm.
with the Mets when they got him. Obviously I was only 4 or 5 years old at the time when that happened, but his home run on 9/11 and really just the way that he carried himself across New York. He's probably one of my favorite ones. Obviously, don't want to rub this in. Probably the David Tyree catch probably also got me into it
I
as
figured that would
well.
be in there.
It's Super Bowl 42. I probably would say that, but Tyree as well. Eli and Peyton Manning. I love watching them on Monday Night Football too. I know, obviously, I always love when Strahan and all the others, when they would say Eli, whether he's on the sidelines or even when he's watching the game, he just has the face
Yeah.
just the face in the middle, just showing
Yeah.
no emotion, with the thing. But like I said, Piazza, Eli Manning, and obviously I know the Knicks, really weren't anything to write home about. For me, I wasn't the biggest Carmelo Anthony fan when
Mhm.
he was there, and I kind of still don't. I mean, I like Brunson now. Obviously, I think he's the way that he's carried himself. I know Towns and Mikal Bridges and some of the others are trying to get going, but I love Brunson, and then probably the Rangers. I would probably say my childhood hero from them. Probably Henrik Lundqvist, and
Mhm.
obviously maybe early on as well, Mark Messier too. I mean, I know Messier was there when they last won the Stanley Cup, and that was before I was born, but then he came back to the Rangers. But just kind of
Right.
some of my childhood heroes that I really look up to and still do to this day. I mean, a lot of them are having fun on TV, like Strahan, Lundqvist, and some of the others making a pretty good second career in television.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been great. I really admire, Lundqvist and
Mhm.
Piazza too. Can't say the same about Strahan and any of the Giants on those teams, but that's just personal. But yeah, that's awesome. I
Well,
love hearing you
I
talk.
was gonna say, mind if I switch the question to you quick? If mind if
Yeah,
I ask you some of your childhood heroes?
yeah. Childhood heroes, Tom Brady, obviously, David Ortiz,
Right.
uh, Paul Pierce, and
Yeah.
uh, I would say Patrice Bergeron and Zdeno
Mm.
Chara.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
were kind of my heroes from each team growing up. And
Probably would you say Thornton for the Bruins?
yeah, Joe
Mhm.
Thorne was right when I was starting to get into hockey is when we traded him.
Mhm.
So I obviously knew how good he was and the allure around Joe, but um, the Bergeron and Zdeno era was my wheelhouse. But yeah, I think that like my first, not the first, but the big, you know, event that made me fall in love with sports was the '04 Red Sox.
Mm.
Just the amount of characters on that team.
Mhm.
It's fun seeing all these documentaries come out about
Mhm.
them and the crazy stuff that they were doing in the locker rooms and just the group of idiots is what they would call themselves. So um, yeah, but then the early Patriots Super Bowls,
Right.
I was 4, 5, and
Mhm.
7 around those. So have slight memories of actually watching those. But I was so young, I just kind of figured that's what happened every year. um,
Right.
so when the Red Sox won in '04, I knew more about the history of the Red Sox and the true meaning and
Mhm.
behind that. So I would definitely say all those heroes growing up, and then that particular event was what made me the crazy sports fan that I am.
It amazes me, kind of thinking back on that all those 20 years ago. It is crazy to think that, but just like it amazes me that to this day, I just remember. I think it was like last year. I think like in the Stanley Cup when the Panthers were up 3 games to none, and then Edmonton sent it to the game 7 when they won three in a row. Or I can't remember like saying to someone, "Can we see like what the Red Sox did to the Yankees?"
Yeah.
And before I was like saying like it just like mind boggles me that no one I think has ever been able to do that since. Just completely erase a 3-0 lead in any postseason series, whether it's basketball, baseball, or hockey. Obviously, I know those are the only ones that go to game 7s. Obviously, baseball, though, in the division series and the wild card now, it's 3, 5, and then it's 7 games each in the
Hmm.
championship series and the World Series then.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's crazy. I get chills just thinking about it, but it's a good time.
Sure. Well, I think that's actually gonna wrap us up here for tonight. We're about to reach the 1 hour mark, but Will, I'll let you have the last word here before I close us out here for the night.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on. I've had a blast. Hopefully, our two football teams figure it out and switch it around. Hopefully, our basketball teams, keep the hot streak going and meet up in the playoffs. That'd be fun. And you know, I'm just excited for the new year and what's to come in sports. And I think 2024 was a real blast. So happy New Year to everyone, and let's get on to 2025.
That's right. Well, that's going to go ahead and that's going to do it for us here tonight on a AFC Sport Talk podcast. Tomorrow night, I'll be having my cousins Samuel and Elijah Goodell and Ben Adams will be joining me tomorrow night. I'm still a little uncertain if Billy McGee will join us, but certainly, next year, I'm really looking forward to hopefully growing this podcast a lot more next year, hopefully as well. Like I was telling you earlier, I'd love to see if I can get Clay on here sometime as well for us to talk. But, definitely thank you all for joining us here. This is Alex, Chris, and Will Harris signing off here on this AFC Sport Talk podcast special for Christmas and New Year's. Hope everybody had a great Christmas and have a happy New Year, and we will see you all in 2025. Have a good night, everybody.